I'm Stacey Martinet. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Mashable, and I'm really excited to be here with two very interesting men who are really behind two products that have a ton of social data. So we're going to talk about social analytics, but first let me introduce. This is Sachin Kamdar. He's the CEO and co-founder of Parsely. Parsely's flagship product is called Dash. It's an analytic tool that informs writers and editors which posts, sections, authors, or referrals are performing best on their site. Before starting this, he was an ed tech consultant, helping schools in New York City build and implement technology. And prior to that, he taught math and economics. And we have Frank Spelser, who is the co-founder of SocialFlow. He has used math, language analysis, and technology to help develop algorithms that power SocialFlow. And SocialFlow is, I'm going to let Frank do this because this is what you get paid to do. I'll let you both describe the companies. But he's been doing practical applications of science and data since early childhood when he started writing code at the age of 8. And before SocialFlow, he held CTO positions at Tackle, which was acquired by Alloy, and at Heavy. So thank you for joining me. I think it would be helpful for those in the audience who aren't familiar with your two companies to give a very, very brief description of what you do and what you're trying to do.
Sure.
Want to start, Sachin?
Sure. Parsely is an analytics and optimization platform. We're a company that is solely focused on digital media. And our tool, Dash, is really concentrated around picking up publisher-specific metrics and surfacing it through a really nice interface to make actionable decisions about what you want to do with that data. And then behind the scenes, we have an API and a platform that allows product teams at these organizations to tap into the data that we collect, the technology that we have to build engaging product using our technology and using our APIs.
So you're sitting on top of the publisher site, seeing all the data that's coming in,
Yep.
where it's going, and where the engagement is.
That's right.
Okay, cool. And Frank, you're kind of in the social area then.
Yes. SocialFlow has 3 lines of business. One looks at, of all the things, everybody that takes part in the social media conversation is a publisher. So a lot of big brands and media companies use SocialFlow to figure out, of all the things they're going to say, which is likely to yield the most ROI in terms of trust, area under the curve for future clicks, retweets, mentions, likes, shares, comments, things like that. So we help rank in real time according to changing conversational appetites. What should you say? We also use the same algorithm to figure out where are customers that are performing like my customers now on the social graph, and how do I bid to acquire their attention? And then the third line of business we have is a competitive intelligence product that segments those audiences even further to make your publishing decisions a little more informed in terms of if you're underserving a specific market or demographic, what do they find most engaging? And on the flip side, if you're winning, if you're out over-indexing in a specific area, where do you find more of them and how do you buy them?
So you're both sitting on a ton of data within social, and then when social comes on to publisher sites, and Frank, your case is brands. So, not all social networks are equal, right? So what are some of the things you're seeing from the various networks, the behaviors that are different around engagement and data? If you can break it down. Do you want to start, Sheen?
Sure. So our network tracks about 3.5 billion page views across the web, mostly all content sites, digital media sites. And so we see a lot of interesting things. I think one of the things that we see is the difference between Facebook and Twitter. And Twitter, when we see content that's going viral on Twitter, we see it having a longer life cycle because you have sort of an influencer picking it up and then another influencer picking it up, and it sort of trends that way. On Facebook, we see that there's larger reach, so you're going to hit more people on Facebook, but the life cycle is going to be a little bit shorter. And then there's also interesting things that we see specific with LinkedIn and Pinterest. Pinterest is pretty obvious. It's really focused on sort of lifestyle, entertainment, celebrity traction. And so sites that are dealing with that sort of stuff do see a lot of traffic from Pinterest. But I think that actually opens the door for interesting ways that traditional news sites or guys that aren't talking about sort of those specific areas can dive into Pinterest and start to leverage that as a platform as well. well. And then finally, LinkedIn is one of the platforms that I think is really starting to emerge as actually a pretty good distribution mechanism for content. Right now, what we see is that when you're talking about business or education-related things, content tends to do really, really well on LinkedIn. Makes sense. These are people that are interested in those specific areas. But I think you're going to see more and more traffic coming from LinkedIn as they start to have their own organic content there, as they start to push their own editorial strategies. And I think Dan Roth from LinkedIn is here today, so I'm sure he's going to have a lot to share about that.
I would just extend on a few of those points. One, to the concept of Twitter having a longer life cycle, I think it has a lot to do with, so when Twitter first started, or when you have an immature audience on Twitter, and you publish something, you have a spike, and then it decays very quickly in a very predictable pattern. But as you assemble an audience around the topics that they expect to come out of the account or the handle they've subscribed to, what happens is the audience itself becomes more densely connected to one another. And the influencer piece isn't like, an influencer is not somebody that has 500,000 followers. You don't build your business by begging people to retweet you. What you want to do is find the statistical predictability that the message will travel. And the way the message will travel is that it's contextually relevant, and the audience is assembled and self-organized around something, a handle, in this case on Twitter, that they predict will give them a certain amount of information that has a utility. The utility has a specific shelf life, and if the shelf life is long enough and somebody picks it up and finds it important, then they redistribute that message, and it gives it another life. So you can see the peaks lasting a little bit longer, the more utility and the more predictability that the audience has around the information. And it's really important that instead of trying to be all things to all people, I mean, you have general news sites and people subscribe to them for that reason. But when you have something that services the need of the audience, you win the battle for attention by successfully servicing the thing that people want to pay attention to. On the Facebook side, it's used in a bunch of different ways. Like, I use Facebook to share pictures of my family, which probably nobody in here wants to see. On the flip side,
I do too.
Well, thanks. My kids are very
really
cute.
Yeah.
But occasionally I'll have something that I think impacts people that I know on a personal level, and I'll share a political story that will then I will expect it to get traction outside of it. But I'm a little more judicious, and I don't publish as frequently. So I think because of the multi-purpose use of Facebook, it's not something like Twitter that's like a broadcast platform that I would walk into the stage, and anything I would publish to Twitter, I would be perfectly comfortable from right here just saying into the audience. I think for Facebook, it's one of those things where you're a little more selective because of the bi-directional nature of the audience that you have. Now, brands have like pages that you just subscribe to, but on that side of the equation, I think you have to really look at the mix so that you don't sort of drive your audience away and convince them to tune out. Whereas Twitter, it's more centered around the topical expectations that come out of it. And on Facebook, it's centered around the novelty and entertainment value, especially in the friend situation. Mm-hmm. And I think...
So on Twitter, it's more about context than person, whereas on Facebook, it's a little more about people being awesome.
It's a much more even mix, I think. And that's one major difference between the two networks. I mean, on Twitter, you have a broadcast distribution platform, and on Facebook, it's a bi-directional sort of conversational platform. Even if it's an asynchronous conversation, part of the conversational signal on Facebook is that you ignore me. So I think, EdgeRank will help you do that too if you're not very good at it.
I think the other interesting thing between the two is that it's hard to sort of know what Facebook is going to do with users' news feeds. And so that's not something you can really deal with. But on Twitter, it's open, and they're distributing it to everybody. And so I think that's also why you see that, as Frank said, the sort of multiple peaks on Twitter, because you can have a story sort of extend itself, whereas with Facebook, there's a chance that it could get buried, and you wouldn't really know or have an influence over that because the news feed is sort of changing what an individual user sees.
So you work with a lot of clients who are processing a lot of data from a lot of different places, whether that's in their internal traffic analytics, third-party research, and now social analytics in different forms. And I'm sure that there are frustrations and recommendations on sort of how they should be looping social into the overall mix, right? How should social fit into the overall data analytics within a company, at a publisher or a brand?
Well, I think if you look at the way things have evolved, back in the early 50s and 60s, you had like a telephone operator. So you had like the person that dealt with the telephone. And in the 90s, I remember this, I'm old enough to remember this, where you had like the computer guy. And then just 4 or 5 years ago, you had like the social person at your company. But what you're seeing now is that function is spreading across the company. So you have investor relations and you have all these different ways. And part of the importance is getting the information out in a timely manner so that the people that matter and can do something with the information get it in enough time and get it from a way that they can sort of validate and trust. And I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, but I think you're moving away from it being just a singular function to integrating across the way we do things, such as the way that now everybody has phones and everybody has computers and everybody has social. So we're learning how to use it properly and not to overuse it. And I think it's a signal to noise personal etiquette problem that we're working through as a society right now. And it's very complicated, but I think we're starting to get it. And I know that probably isn't exactly the question that you asked, but I think it's a very important thing to address.
Yeah, I think for what we see and what I see sort of larger in the industry is that for the past several years, social was always sort of siloed off. Like, this is social and this is everything else. And so I think one of the big things that's happening right now is the bridging of the two. And you're seeing really large companies start to embrace that. Outside of media, what Salesforce is thinking about doing with Chatter and their social strategy to help companies out. You have Yammer being acquired by Microsoft as sort of internal social strategies. And so when I think about social data, I really think it as being a piece to the puzzle. And so, one thing we try to do at Parsely is really try to marry all of the other data that we're collecting about the publisher with social data to provide that overlay and present the best opportunities. Because I think if you're just thinking about it on its own, you're not really seeing the best opportunities possible. You want to be able to combine it with other areas. On the brand side, that could be with sales. On the media side, it could be with users. It could be with product. It could be with your social media person, or it could just be with your content creators and your editors. And so really trying to build that back into other areas of your organization is really important.
One of the defining elements of what is social data is the scope of access to the data. And so, it's one of the things where you used to have privacy networks and email distribution lists, but I think social data isn't any different from like normal data that we all have. It's just who gets it and when and how frequently and how quickly. And I think the defining factor of what is social is the scope of access to that data.
So let's talk about search, right? A lot of studies coming out this year that's saying social is now the biggest driver of search. So whether that's updates or comments being defined as social. From a publisher point of view, is social, do you think, a new driver of success, or does it just become another function of search?
Well, the way that I sort of see it is that news and content is just inherently social. All the way back to, going to the town square and talking about the news. That was social, right? And so when you think about these platforms that have evolved, like Twitter and Facebook and some of these other ones, it's really just empowering that specific aspect. And that didn't exist back 10 years ago when search was the main way that you found content. So I think when you're thinking about media and publishers specifically, totally social is a huge strategy, and it's going to continue to be a huge strategy moving forward. Also with, and this is just sort of a side note here, with Google hiding more and more of their referral traffic, it's harder to sort of pinpoint where there are opportunities. You can't pluck out the keywords as often, but with social, you can sort of see what is happening with users there at a larger scale with your organization, with competitors like SocialFlow does, and then sort of with specific users in your outreach there. And so I think it's just inherent to media, and it's going to continue to be a driver and a huge success for media moving forward.
It's the next generation of the discovery mechanism, right? So before you'd had that person that your aunt would send you these crazy emails and you would just ignore them. Yeah, and you'd just be like, all right, look, I'm not reading that. But every once in a while, someone would send you an email and you're like, all right, I'm going to pay attention to this because the information is there. And you'd think, well, I'd really like to see what that person searches for. It's almost like looking over their shoulder and seeing somebody that knows what they're doing searching for really cool stuff. Social allows you to have that, so you don't have to basically look at what that person is seeking out in terms of information. They get to broadcast what they find interesting, but it's not a situation where you have to look at what someone's searching for. You have a curation mechanism that layers in on top of the information all this person is getting through, and they say, this is what I find interesting, and then if you want more of it, then you go search for more of it. And I think that the sort of the way it works is, here's a discovery mechanism of all the things that could be interesting, filtered through a curation mechanism of people that you built as a trust network. And then when you find something that requires you to dig a little deeper, then you go search. So I think the search model is flipping to that.
Do you think that the data is there to say if you had limited budget, social marketing is more important than search marketing?
I think that for any website, there's SEO that you just need to do. It just needs to happen. If you're not doing it, then you should be doing it. But I think what social allows for is, and this is sort of a consequence of it, is it's dynamic. And so you have to continually put effort into it to reap the rewards of social. It's not something where it's like, I need to just have the right markup on my site and then I'm optimized, right? With social, you need to be sort of continually engaged with it. And I think you're going to see more and more platforms like SocialFlow sort of emerge where they're focused on sort of optimizing that for the users.
Yeah, there's no way that I'm going to get up here and tell you to stop spending money on search because it works. But on the flip side, I won't be able to quote you the exact numbers, but we've made Facebook marketing at least as economical as search marketing. And we have multiple case studies that prove that we've outperformed. I see people shaking their heads, but we've done it. And if you come in and you want to see it, we've made advertising on Facebook pay better than advertising on Google. And I think it needs to be a part of your mix because what's going to happen is you have the distribution shifting away from access models where you pay because people are going to be in front of the TV at a certain time. And people have a way of consuming TV now when they consume when they want. So instead of having a captive audience, you have this attention network where people can spread it anywhere. And what winds up happening is instead of getting these predictable places to spend to get people's access, you have to move the money that you're spending to get people's attention. So the money shifts from an access network to an attention network, and the way that you can move the needle on an attention network is by altering the discovery mechanism. And so I think spending money on social, which is a much more important and growing way of discovering content, makes a lot of sense instead of spending on things that are fixed and rigid and are dying off. You move your money to where you're going to be able to make the future investment and move the needle that way.
And this is sort of indirectly related, but I think definitely something that should be talked about, which is that when you think about social, like I said, social is sort of inherent to media and inherent to publishers. And so when you think about ad spends for media companies and they're thinking about where to spend, should I spend it on Facebook, should I spend it on Twitter, or should I go to the publisher? I think what you're finding more and more is that advertising companies are interested in going directly to the publisher. And I think it's directly because of what Frank said, which is that you're able to grab the attention because you can control, and this is why you're seeing forms of sponsored content and content marketing just blow up right now, because you can really sort of control what is happening with that user when they hit the site. I want to be surrounded by content that's related to green energy. I want my brand to be surrounded by a publisher like Mashable that is all about social, and that's what I want to be attached to. And that's harder to do on a Facebook or a Twitter because the user associates themselves with those specific platforms. But when you go to a publisher, it opens the door. And so I think, that's something that is going to be harder for the social networks to do, but it's going to be a boon for publishers today.
And actually what we're seeing at Mashable and custom content now, what we're calling native advertising, is something we've been doing for about 4 years, and the demand is definitely growing. And we've seen that when you have this content and it gets shared out in social, and the engagements on those networks for those brands increase, the referrals back to Mashable, and then engagement with that content increases. But also the display that surrounds the content is like 2x.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really
They came
nice
there with
thing.
an expectation, and then you match the expectation with the context that they're expecting.
Right.
That makes total sense.
So and it's an easy sell too. It's you don't need to spend money on Twitter or Facebook because we have so much social just built into our brand. You're going to get that same benefit if you advertise on us as a publisher. And you're going to get the whole sort of brand sort of context that you want and the way that you want your brand to be perceived by the user. And that's powerful. That's a powerful message to send to brands and advertisers right now.
So we're talking about money. So how much am I worth on social networks? How much is my like worth? How much am I as a fan worth?
I don't think that's a very good measure, to be quite honest with you. Because
why not?
Well, if you're just out there acquiring likes for the sake of acquiring likes, Facebook has EdgeRank, which everybody's familiar with. It's like the Darth Vader of social, and so
I often feel like that.
And so if you're just putting likes into your audience, mm-hmm. when you put out an organic message, when it hits your audience, if the likes aren't contextually inclined to have a propensity to engage with you, the clock's ticking against you. And the number of likes you have and the ratio of success you have against them works against you if you didn't build your audience with the contextual intention to consume that type of content. So the like itself is hard to value because the way you got it matters more than that you have it. What does matter is lining up clicks, likes, growth of audience on Twitter and all those things to first setting up a set of proxy metrics like clicks, likes, retweets, mentions, comments, and things like that, and then correlating them to things that are on-site success metrics like checkouts, time spent on site, how many hops they took through your Markov model, how deep they got into your site, that type of thing. And then you can begin to establish a value for your specific audience, because it's not going to be the same as my specific audience if I built my audience a different way. Once you know that, then you segment your audience, you find out who performs, and then you can apply a value to that and go after those ones. And then the idea then is just to try to do whatever you can to get that value as low as possible, that you're paying for it and that it'll give it to you. So as much as everybody wants a uniform way to value this we've already, as a user of social, made so many mistakes that it is not possible to value it the way you'd want to as a marketer. What you need to do is do a little bit more homework and then find out the pieces that do work for you, and then go buy more of those pieces or publish to activate more of those pieces to bring them back in.
And I completely agree with all that, and I think it depends on what you want to do with that user. That's going to really determine how valuable that user is. Do you want them to download your app? Do you want them to just visit this article? Do you want them to follow you on Facebook or Twitter? Or do you want them to tweet something out? All those things have different value for your company. I will say one thing that's interesting, though, is that it's easier to figure out value if you're just looking at pure traffic with Twitter and Pinterest because they are open networks. And so what that means is that you can actually see that this user's tweet drove 100 clicks to my site, 200 clicks to my site, or this user's pin drove X amount of traffic. And that's a clear way to sort of identify who the influencers are that are tweeting about you or talking about you. And that could be a good way to sort of build up a audience of influencers that you can continually reach out to.
Great. So we're just about out of time. But before we go, 2013 predictions in social analytics.
I have a few, actually. So I think what you'll see is you'll see people will move away from likes, that Facebook will become a network by which you can then start to measure actual conversions and apply dollars to the conversions that you're getting out of Facebook. Twitter will start to show referral traffic through TICO and will show you how much of a lift it's providing. And it'll also start to give you tools by which you can then leverage to get more lift. Because it needs a monetization strategy that's scalable and they have such reach, they're in a perfect position to do that. And all of their traffic goes through their link proxy. So they're going to use that. And then Facebook is going to use the fact that it can direct you to a segment of audience that performs very well and then apply a conversion value to that then they can ARB, because that's going to be a bigger model for them. And so maybe that doesn't happen in the first half of 2013, but eventually that does happen.
I mean, I think I'm going to go back to sort of what I said earlier, which is that you're going to see social analytics pervade through other systems. That's going to be really important as you start to understand the ROI of social and understand what that means for your brand. So I think you're going to see that with additional tools that you're using. I think you're going to see it applied to new and interesting ways when you think about ways to advertise against social, when you think about ways to structure that data for your own brand as opposed to sort of going directly out there. And then I think what you're going to find is that media companies are just going to pour more resources into it. And it's not just going to be about a social media person at their organization. It's going to be about a coherent social strategy. And that's going to be really important because of the sheer fact that content is social, and that's where people are talking about content.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time and insights. And now we are going to break for lunch and networking, and we'll come back here after that.